The words didn't just cut. They crystallized in the air, leaving a permanent frosty scar in the opulent silence. Don't bother showing her your collection. She couldn't afford the velvet pouch, let alone what goes inside it. My mother's voice, honed to a razor's edge by decades of practiced condescension, severed the hushed atmosphere of the boutique. The very air seemed to stiffen. The delicate, almost imperceptible melody of a classical piano piece faltered in my mind, as if the musician himself had winced. I remained motionless in the heart of Covington and Graves, a sanctuary of fine jewelry, pretending the verbal shrapnel hadn't found its mark. But it had. Each syllable landed with the precision of a master assassin, striking at a wound that had never fully healed. Before we move forward, I want to hear from you. Where are you joining us from today? Share your city in the comments below. And once you've seen this story through to the end, I want your honest opinion. What would you have done in my shoes? Tell me in the comments. We read every single one. Now, let's begin. The young sales associate, a woman with a name tag that read Elise, froze mid-step. Her carefully neutral smile wavered, caught in the no-man's land between professional courtesy and sheer disbelief. My mother's smirk, a subtle, triumphant curve of her lips, provided the only answer she needed. You may direct your attention to me, my mother stated, her tone now smooth as polished onyx. The single strand of South Sea pearls around her neck gleamed with a soft, entitled light. My daughter is merely accompanying me. A spectator. I knew that tone intimately. It was a weapon she wielded with elegance, a venom delivered with a smile, designed to diminish and control. It was the same tone that could, in an instant, strip away the years and reduce me to a gawky, uncertain teenager, not the 28-year-old woman I was. A familiar constriction tightened my throat, a visceral reaction to a lifetime of these moments. But this time I pushed it down, forcing a placid, almost serene expression onto my face. Actually, I said, and was surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. It didn't quiver. It held. I have an appointment. My mother released a short, dry sound that was more dismissal than laughter. Looking is free, I suppose. I turned my back to her, a small act of defiance that felt as significant as a declaration of war, and addressed the flustered Elise. Sienna Reed. I placed a custom order several weeks ago. It was scheduled for arrival this week. Before Elise could fumble for a response or a ledger, a new presence materialized from the subdued lighting at the back of the store. Mr. Thorne, the boutique manager. He was a man whose authority was woven into the very fabric of his impeccably tailored suit, his confidence a quiet, substantial force. His eyes scanned the room and settled on me. Instantly, his professional demeanor warmed into genuine recognition. Miss Reed, he said, his voice a low, respectful baritone. A pleasure to see you. Your pieces from the Geneva atelier arrived just this morning. We've prepared the VIP viewing suite for you, if you'd care to follow me. For a heartbeat, the world stopped spinning on its axis. My mother's lips parted in a silent, stunned "oh." The frozen smile on her face cracked, revealing the confusion beneath. I beg your pardon, she interjected, her voice regaining some of its sharpness. There must be some confusion. Mr. Thorne turned a polite but unyielding gaze toward her. There is no confusion, madam. Miss Reed is one of our premier independent designers. Her work comprises the new Aethel collection, an exclusive partnership with our house. Elise's jaw went slack. A well-dressed couple examining a tray of emerald brooches nearby paused and turned, their curiosity a palpable, pricking thing. I allowed my gaze to settle on my mother. I watched, in real time, as the foundation of her certainty began to fracture and crumble. For years, she had narrated a story to anyone who would listen, a story of a daughter who had squandered her potential on a frivolous dream. She had scoffed when I sold my first online designs, insisting that true security was found not in a portfolio, but in a partner's portfolio. Now she stood, immobilized, in the very temple of materialism she revered, surrounded by creations that had sprung from my own mind and hands. I followed Mr. Thorne, my heart hammering a rhythm that was not quite pride, but something more profound, more cathartic, vindication. Inside the private suite, the world softened and shimmered. The lighting was deliberate, theatrical, illuminating the velvet-lined trays on the central table. There they were, my sketches, my midnight musings, my soul poured onto paper, now rendered in breathtaking platinum and diamond. Delicate, architectural lines intertwined with hand-selected stones, each piece bearing the subtle engraved mark that was my signature. Senior. Mr. Thorne watched me, a knowing smile touching his lips. They are truly exceptional, he murmured. The Geneva office was correct. They called your vision revolutionary. For a long moment, I was speechless. My fingers, trembling slightly, reached out and traced the cool, brilliant surface of a necklace I had designed during a particularly bleak period, a piece born of sorrow and hope. It was perfect. And then she was there, a silhouette in the doorway. My mother, her complexion pale, her usual composure replaced by a stunned silence. I met her gaze, holding it. "You were right, Mother," I said, my voice soft but clear in the hushed room. I could never afford to purchase these. I let the pause hang, heavy and significant. I designed them. The silence that filled the suite was not empty. It was dense, resonant, and it sparkled with a brilliance that outshone every gem in the place. The sharp, rhythmic click of her heels on the marble floor pursued me out of Covington and Graves. Her voice, a low, furious whisper, was at my back the moment the automated doors slid shut behind us. "Sienna, what in God's name was that performance about?" I didn't answer immediately. I filled my lungs with the brisk, electric air of a New York afternoon. For the first time in as long as I could remember, walking beside her didn't make me feel like I was shrinking. I felt solid. I turned to face her, under the stark light of the afternoon sun. "It wasn't a performance," I stated. "That was my work, my profession." Her lips compressed into a thin, bloodless line. "Since when do you have a profession?" she hissed, the word laced with sarcasm. "You're trying to tell me that those artifacts with their astronomical price tags are yours?" "Yes," I replied, the word feeling like a cornerstone being laid. "Every initial sketch, every painstaking revision, every hour of sleep I sacrificed that you labeled a waste." Her face underwent a subtle but violent rearrangement. I could see the war waging behind her eyes, a battle between a lifetime of ingrained disbelief and the undeniable evidence that had just been presented to her. "You should have told me," she finally managed, her voice strained. A soft, bitter laugh escaped me. "Would you have listened? You only hear what has a $sign attached to it." She opened her mouth to retort, but the dam inside me had broken, and years of suppressed words came flooding out. "Do you have any idea how many times I came this close to giving up? How many dawns I saw, after working a double shift at the cafe, my fingers aching, just so I could afford a single gram of silver wire? And when I would call you, hoping for a shred of encouragement, for just one 'I believe in you,' what did I get? A lecture on being pragmatic." She cut in, her tone brittle. "That's precisely the point. I was being a mother." "No," I said, my voice gaining a strength that made her blink. I took a step closer. "You were being a warden of your own failed aspirations. Marry well, stay quiet, look pretty. You never cared about what fueled my soul. You only cared about how it reflected on you." The traffic light at the corner changed, casting a sudden greenish pallor over her face, highlighting a strange mix of envy and dawning comprehension. "You sound just like your father," she muttered, a low blow meant to disarm, always casting himself as the victim. The mention of him was a physical ache in my chest. "Dad saw me," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. "He championed my art until the very end. You tried to erase that part of him, because it didn't align with your pristine, narrow world." Her jaw clenched. For once, the well of her caustic commentary had run dry. I drew a slow, deliberate breath and turned toward the curb. "You know, for years I was convinced that if I could just become successful enough, it would change how you felt about me. But it won't, and I'm finally okay with that." She hurried after me, her heels tapping out a frantic, staccato rhythm on the pavement. "Sienna, wait, don't you dare walk away from me." I paused and turned back, my posture straight. "I'm not walking away from you, Mother. I'm walking forward on my own path." The look on her face then was one I had never seen before. It was as if, for the first time, her vision had cleared, and she was seeing me not as an extension of herself, but as a separate, autonomous entity who no longer required her validation to exist. As I reached for the door handle of my car, she called out one last, desperate thing. "Sienna, everyone in there was looking at me. Do you understand? You made a spectacle of me." I stopped, my hand resting on the cool metal. I looked back at her, meeting her wounded gaze squarely. "Now you know what it feels like." The cacophony of the city, the blaring horns, the distant sirens, the murmur of 1,000 lives, swallowed her stunned silence. As I pulled away from the curb, tears welled in my eyes, blurring the iconic skyline into a watercolor painting. They were not tears of sadness, but of release. It was the feeling of a weight I had carried for a lifetime being lifted, piece by piece, like shards of stained glass being carefully swept from a cathedral floor. In my rearview mirror, the elegant facade of Covington and Graves grew smaller, its windows reflecting the sun, winking at me like a promise. Sometimes, the most beautiful form of retribution isn't retribution at all. It's the simple, undeniable act of rising from a place you were told you would forever lie. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that my ascent was only beginning. 2 months later, I stood before a floor-to-ceiling window in Paris. The city of light spread out before me like a jeweled carpet. The early morning sun set the Seine on fire, and in the distance, the Eiffel Tower stood as a silent, graceful sentinel. My reflection in the glass, a woman in a simple black dress, her posture poised, was superimposed over the breathtaking view. Behind me, the pristine white showroom hummed with a pre-show energy that was both exhilarating and terrifying. It still felt like a dream I might wake from at any moment. My debut collection, Lumière Nocturne by Sienna Reed, was minutes away from its unveiling at the annual La Rive Gauche Fashion Gala. The pages of my sketchbook, once derided as the doodles of a daydreamer, were now encased in glass displays, surrounded by the murmurs of fashion editors, wealthy collectors, and critics from across the globe. They saw the finished product, the glittering culmination. What they didn't see was the shadow behind every facet, the memory of struggle, the echo of doubt, the taste of cheap coffee and exhaustion. As I gently adjusted the clasp of the centerpiece necklace, a piece I had designed in the raw, grief-stricken months following my father's passing, my assistant Chloe rushed over, her eyes wide. "Sienna, you are not going to believe who just secured a last-minute invitation to the gala." I offered a faint, weary smile. "Another journalist from Le Monde? I thought we'd accounted for them all." She shook her head, her expression a mix of anxiety and disbelief. She held out a digital tablet, displaying a newly confirmed RSVP. "Linda Reed. Your mother." My heart seemed to stutter in my chest, missing a full beat. "What? How?" "She contacted the head office directly," Chloe explained, her voice cautious. "She's already en route from the airport. And get this, she informed the events team that she's your personal manager." I let out a long, controlled breath, feeling a familiar tension coiling in my stomach. I shouldn't have been shocked. My mother, who had spent a lifetime minimizing my ambitions, possessed a preternatural talent for arriving the moment my success cast a light too bright for her to ignore. That evening, the gala hall was a vortex of opulence. Light refracted off crystal chandeliers and the sequined gowns of Parisian elite. Cameras flashed like a perpetual lightning storm, and the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and old money. Yet, amidst the dizzying spectacle, I felt an unshakable calm. I was no longer the girl who shriveled under her mother's gaze. I was the architect of this moment. And then, she made her entrance. Linda Reed swept into the room, draped in a gown of sapphire silk that spoke of established, conservative wealth. Her diamond studs were large, flawless, and somehow cold, mismatched with the tight, calculated expression on her face. Her eyes, sharp and scanning, combed the crowd until they locked onto me. For a suspended moment, we were the only two people in the room, connected by a thread of shared history and simmering conflict. Then, the mask slid into place. She glided toward me, a polished smile gracing her lips. "Sienna," she said, her voice syrupy as she extended a hand. "You look radiant. The previews in the papers are calling you the fresh voice of modern luxury. I suppose I shall have to start telling people I saw it in you all along." I looked from her outstretched hand, back to her eyes. "That's amusing," I replied, my tone even. "I distinctly recall you predicting my designs would be lucky to fetch a few euros at a flea market." Her smile held, but a flicker in her eyes betrayed her. "I may have been mistaken," she said quickly, lowering her voice so only I could hear. "We all have our moments, darling. But tonight is not the night to dwell on them. Everyone here knows we are mother and daughter. Let's at least present a united front." Her words, a united front, struck a familiar, dissonant chord. That had been the mantra of my childhood. Present a united front. Appear happy. Appear perfect. Appear successful. Never ever be authentic. I straightened my shoulders, feeling the fine silk of my dress shift against my skin. "I don't need to present a front anymore, Mother." Before she could formulate a reply, the amplified voice of the master of ceremonies resonated through the grand hall. "Mesdames et messieurs, please welcome to the stage the visionary behind tonight's breathtaking collection, the designer of Lumière Nocturne, Sienna Reed." A wave of applause crashed over the room. A barrage of flashbulbs erupted, bleaching the world white for a second. My name was announced, echoing off the gilded walls, and in that moment, it was louder than any criticism she had ever uttered. I walked toward the stage, each step measured, and sure, my heart pounding in time with the clapping hands. From the elevated platform, I found her in the crowd. She stood perfectly still, and for a brief, unguarded moment, I saw it, the glimmer of unshed tears threatening to undermine her facade of pride. When I spoke into the microphone, my voice was clear and carried across the spellbound audience. I did not look away from her. "This collection," I began, "is for every person who has ever been told their light was not bright enough, their dream not grand enough. Sometimes, the people who stand the closest to us are the last to see our radiance. Sometimes, they need to be momentarily blinded by it before they can truly see." A collective, soft gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by a profound, attentive silence. The cameras swiveled, their lenses focusing on my mother's face. She lowered her gaze to the floor, and in that gesture, I didn't see defeat. I saw a long overdue recognition. The applause that followed was thunderous, sustained. It wasn't just for the jewelry displayed on models who now glided onto the stage. It was for the story. It was for survival. And standing there, bathed in that adulation and light, I had never felt more brilliantly myself. When the final echoes of applause faded and I stepped down from the stage, a profound quiet settled within me. My hands trembled slightly, but it wasn't from nervous excitement. It was the tremor of a long-held burden being finally, irrevocably, set down. It was the vibration of freedom. The night was a resounding, objective success. The entire Lumière Nocturne collection had been purchased by a single, anonymous buyer from Monaco before the gala had even concluded. The critics, who could make or break careers with a single phrase, scribbled notes praising the emotional architecture and narrative brilliance of the work. Monsieur Laurent, the legendary head of La Rive Gauche, had kissed my hand and called me the new soul of French joaillerie. Yet, as the crowd began to thin and the cameras sought new subjects, I noticed her. My mother was standing near a towering floral arrangement at the far end of the ballroom, deliberately distanced from the celebrating throng. Her expression was complex, unreadable, a map of conflicting emotions. The woman who had once declared my ambitions a guaranteed path to ruin now looked adrift in a sea of my triumph. Chloe approached, her face split by an irrepressible grin. "Sienna, you've done it. The Laurent team is already talking about a contract for a second, larger collection next year. It's insane." I returned her smile, though mine was more subdued. "It's incredible," I agreed. "Would you excuse me for a moment?" She nodded understandingly, and I began the long walk across the vast expanse of marble floor. The sound of my heels was the only thing I could hear. My mother turned as I approached. For the first time in my life, her gaze held no readiness for a fight. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft, almost frayed at the edges. "You were magnificent up there. Thank you," I said quietly. She hesitated, choosing her words with an uncharacteristic care. I shouldn't have said those things. At the jeweler's. Or before. I was harsh. I thought I was protecting you. I folded my arms, not in a gesture of defiance, but to steady myself, to hold my core together. "No, Mother. You were protecting yourself. You were shielding your own social standing from the potential embarrassment of a daughter who refused to conform to your blueprint for a respectable life." Her eyes glistened under the dimmed chandeliers. "Perhaps you're right," she conceded, the words seeming to cost her a great effort. "I was frightened. Your father, he saw it in you instantly, that fire. I couldn't see it. I was so terrified of losing my grip on everything after he was gone, that I tried to control the one thing I never could, you. You lost your grip the moment you tried to cage a spirit that was meant to fly," I replied, my voice gentle but unwavering. "You didn't push me away because I failed. You pushed me away because I stopped needing your permission to succeed." The words hung in the air between us, stark and undeniable. They were the truth, stripped bare of all pretense. She swallowed hard, her throat working. "I don't know how to fix this, Sienna." "You don't have to fix it," I said. "You just have to stop trying to break me." Silence. Then, in a whisper so fragile it seemed it might shatter, she said, "I am proud of you." It wasn't a full apology. It wasn't an absolution for years of accumulated hurt. But it was the first time she had ever uttered those words, without a hint of condition or irony. And a part of me, the young girl who had stayed up late, sketching by the dim light of a bedside lamp, hoping for a sign, that part of me finally, deeply, exhaled. A small, genuine smile touched my lips. That's all I ever wanted to hear. For a long while we simply stood there in the quiet corner of the bustling hall. The performance was over. The masks were off. There were no more roles to play. It was just two women, one beginning the painful, necessary process of letting go, the other learning how to accept a love that had finally arrived, even if it was from a distance. As the gala wound down and guests began to drift out into the Parisian night, I found my way to a secluded balcony overlooking the Seine. The city lights twinkled, mirroring the diamonds that had, in their own way, been my salvation. Chloe joined me, holding 2 slender flutes of champagne. "To your first collection," she said, handing me a glass and clinking hers against it. I smiled, raising my glass. "And to the last time I ever allow someone to make me feel small." She laughed softly. "Now that is the Sienna Reed I know." I looked out at the endless, glittering tapestry of Paris, the dark river flowing silently below, the distant hum of the city a lullaby. For the first time, there was no restless ache to prove my worth. I had done it. The validation I had sought externally for so long had been found within. When I returned to my New York apartment a week later, a small, cream-colored envelope was waiting for me on the entryway table. There was no return address, just my name written in an elegant, familiar script. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single, heavy card. The message was brief. "For every star you set in platinum, remember that you are the constellation. Mother." A single tear traced a warm path down my cheek. It wasn't a full reconciliation. It wasn't a rewrite of our history. But it was a start. Perhaps she was capable of change. Perhaps not. The liberating truth was that it no longer dictated my happiness. I had already internalized the most valuable lesson of all, that some people will never acknowledge your worth until the world does so first. That night, I locked the door to my studio, dimmed the lights, and stood before the wall of my new inspirations. Sketches that were bolder, more confident, utterly free. Each one was a ghost of my past. Rejection, struggle, resilience, transmuted into beauty. I whispered into the quiet room. "You did it, Sienna. You did it on your own terms." And somewhere deep in the core of my being, the words "finally," "completely," rang true. Outside my window, the Manhattan skyline glittered with the same fierce energy as Paris. Not because of the external lights, but because I could finally see my own reflection in them, clear and unblemished. Not as a daughter seeking approval, not as a disappointment to be managed, just as myself. A designer, a survivor, a woman who had learned that the most profound victory is not in proving your detractors wrong, but in quietly, unshakably, becoming everything you knew you could be. As I walked to the window, the moonlight caught the edge of a new piece on my desk, a ring I had forged for myself, shaped like a captured shard of starlight. I slipped it onto my finger, felt its cool, solid weight, and smiled. "This one," I whispered to the sleeping city, "is for me." The world outside sparkled back, a universe of infinite possibility. And for the first time in my life, the silence felt not like loneliness, but like peace.